So thank you. This work is based on papers by John Wilkes with Michal Feldman and Amos Fiat, who were my advisors during the PhD, and with Kira Goldner and Anna Karin from UW. Kira was at UW at the time. Now she's in Columbia. Okay. So what's the problem? We want to sell, for muscle attack, we want to sell a single item. When we have multiple buyers, each buyer has some valuation, and we want to give the item to the buyer that values it the most. And the problem is that, the values are only known to the buyer. Okay, so they are private. Any idea how to solve this problem? Just to check that you're all awake. Okay. So we all know the solution. It's the second price auction by Vickery. And this mechanism is truthful, which means that we all know what it means. It means that everybody is rather say his real value. Okay, so what am I talking about here? So let's play a game. Let's say I'm selling this cat doodle, and let me auction it to you. So just raise your hand if you're willing to buy it. $1, anybody? $10? $100? Okay. There's one left with $100. You got it. Pay me later. How about this dog doodle? $1? $10? $100? $1,000? Okay. Okay. How about now? So this is a Picasso doodle. So now we can play it again. I'm sure everything will change. And this shows you where the previous model fails. So what's the problem in this case? Is that there are settings where the value depends on information that the bidders don't have. And even worse, this bidder can be held by other agents. So the information is distributed among bidders, and we still want to maximize value. So this is much more challenging. And this model is called Interdependent values model. In this model, we call the private information a signal. So for instance, if we sell the house, every potential buyer might have a different inspection and notice something else. And of course, maybe everyone notices some other piece of information, some other signal, but its value depends on all the information everybody sees, of course. And so this is the interdependent values model by Paul Milgram and Weber. And let's formulate it. So we have, let's say, one seller and n bidders. Each bidder has some information, some private signal, SI. Think about it as a real number for now. And this private signal, signal is private, the information is private. And each bidder has a valuation function, VI, which maps all the information, all the signals, to a real value. And we assume this valuation is function. The function is public. And it's monotone on decreasing the signals in the information. For instance, you can think about this a simple function. Well, the value is just the average of a signal. This is just one, so you have something concrete to think about. Okay. So in this model, bidders don't know the values. So how does the mechanism look like? So we'll talk about mechanism that I'll talk about mechanism that take the signals as an input. The bidders bid on the private information. And the mechanism computes outcome payments, and you can use the reported bids and the public valuation function that he has. So the bidder received the bids, and then now we can run the check what's the value with the bids for every bidder, and do something, choose some allocation, and choose the payment to the winner. And when I talk about truthfulness in this talk, I'll talk about something we call ex post IC, which means that bidding the true signal is a Nash equilibrium. Which means that if everybody else bids the true signal, my best response is to bid my true signal. Any questions about the model so far? And our goal is welfare maximization. So what's known from welfare maximization? We know that if bidders know the value, we can maximize welfare, even with more general constraints by VCG. And if we have a single parameter interdependent valuations, then in order to maximize welfare, we need some condition I'll talk about soon, which is called sin crossing. And if we talk about combinatorial auctions with interdependent values, if we want something more general, then even sin crossing doesn't help us. So this is how the world looks like. So we have impossibilities here and here. And we have positive results for single item with sin crossing and for private values. And if we don't know how to maximize welfare, maybe a natural question is, can we approximate welfare? Okay. So the first, our first result was that if we relax the sin crossing condition to something we call C-sin crossing, we almost satisfy this condition. We can have some approximate welfare results. Our second positive result is if we think about signals as having decreasing marginal returns, it means that the information has some substitutability. Then we can have some approximation results for combinatorial auctions in general. Okay. So this is the outline of the results, very high level. I'll talk more about them. Okay. So first example, I'll show you why this model is so challenging. So let's show why for single item, without single crossing, without any conditions, you can't get any good approximation. So let's say we're selling this dog doodle again, and there are two bidders, me and Kira. And the twist is that only I have the information. There's an information asymmetry. Only I can see who painted this picture. So there are two possibilities. One is that maybe my son painted it. In this case, I have some sentimental value for it, $100. And Kira has no value for it. The other case is that it's a Picasso. So it's still a dog doodle, so I don't value it much more, but Kira really knows her art, so she has a high value for it, over 100,000. Okay, so in the model, so just that you have the definition maybe more clear. So this matrix is known, this is the valuation function. And what's not known to the auctioneer is the signals, the information. So only I know the information as a bidder. So if you want to maximize welfare, and it's my son's painting, then what we should do is allocate it to me, because otherwise we won't have any good approximation. And if it's a high signal, then the auctioneer should give it to Kira, because her value is much larger. Okay, but what's the problem with this? If I have the information and I really know it's a Picasso, let's say it's really a Picasso, if I say it's a Picasso, I just lose the painting and get no utility, zero utility. If I lie and say it's my son's, then I'll get the painting. My real value for it, it's 100. And if we want an individual rational mechanism, I'll pay 100 at most, which means that I have some positive utility. Which means that no truthful mechanism can implement both allocations at once. This is something that a truthful mechanism cannot do. Okay, so if I know it's a Picasso, of course I should misreport in this case. And we can change this 100K to any number that's larger to 200, and this basically shows you that any truthful mechanism can have an unbounded gap in welfare. Can't have any approximation in general. Any questions about this example? Okay. So we talked about an allocation we cannot implement. So let's define what we can implement. So it's really similar to Milestone's result. We can implement a mechanism if and only if the allocation is monotone in one signal. It means that if a bidder increases his signal, his bid, his probability to get the item increases for a single item. For instance, this is a matrix for deterministic games, which means that these are the signals of player 1, these are the signals of player 2. And in each cell, we have the winner. And it's clear this is monotone, because if one increases the signal, it still wins, and it's the same for 2. This is not monotone because for this cell, if one increases the signal, it becomes from the one that gets the item to a loser, to somebody that doesn't get the item. So we can implement the first allocation rule, and we cannot implement the second allocation rule. And what's nice about it is that we don't need to think hard about devising payments. We just need to think about finding a monotone algorithm that has a good approximation. And in the previous allocation, this is not monotone, of course. If I increase my signal, I am no longer winning. Okay. So we saw a deterministic mechanism cannot have a good approximation. So the next natural question we ask, well, how about randomization? And unfortunately, there is an instance where any randomized mechanism must lose a factor over n in approximation, which means that we might as well give it to some random bidder. Okay. So how does the example look like? So it's very simple again. Each bidder has just two signals, 0 or 1. And the valuation of bidder I is 1, if and only if all other signals of other bidders are 1. So I care only if all other bidders have a high signal. Okay. So it looks something like this. So I'm bidder 1. I don't have value until all bidders have a high signal. Okay. And we can show that any monotone allocation rule must lose a factor of n in the approximation. Okay, I won't give you the proof. It's not that complicated, but I have time yet. Okay. So it sounds like it's a hopeless setting, right? Without sin crossing, we cannot have any fine bound on approximation by deterministic mechanism. Any randomized mechanism loses a factor of n. So what can we do? Okay, so what can we do? The first approach was taken before us, is to assume something that is called sin crossing. So let me define it now. So sin crossing means that my value is more sensitive. My signal affects my value more than it affects others' bidders. So my information is more valuable to me than to other bidders. It's a very standard assumption. It looks something like this. So fix a bidder Vi. As it increases the signal from Si to Si plus delta, its value changes by more than some bidder J. And pictorially, it looks something like this. So we fix the signal of player 2, and now we increase the signal of player 1, and we can see his derivative is larger than, his change in value is larger than player 2, as it increases the signal. And they call it sin crossing because the functions can cross only once. And once player 1 is the highest, it remains the highest. Which means that once a bidder's signal is large enough so he'll have the maximum value, if he increases the signal, it's still the highest valued bidder, which means that allocating to the highest bidder is a monotone allocation rule. Okay, which means that we can implement it by a transfer mechanism. Okay. Okay, so I already said, sin crossing enables full efficiency. We can get implement the optimal welfare. But there are two problems I want to point out. First, there are very natural examples that do not satisfy sin crossing, as was already observed. And this example usually have some information asymmetry between bidders. And second is that even with sin crossing, we cannot go far beyond single item actions. It's only a single parameter property. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about our two relaxation, our two new notions. The first is just relaxing crossing. So again, the bad examples that we had were very far from being sin crossing, because bidder I even didn't care about his own signal. His value was high, even only if all other signals were high. He didn't care at all about his signal. So this example is very far from being sin crossing. How about if we're close to sin crossing somehow? So this is the standard sin crossing condition. And what we call C-sin crossing is just adding a C here. So somebody else can be more sensitive to my signal, but at most a factor of C. So this is a very natural relaxation of the single crossing property. And we ask to what extent does this C, does deviating from single crossing affect our, what we can have by truthful mechanism? Okay, so let's talk about our results a bit. So the first is for 2 bidders and any number of signals. We can get a deterministic C approximation. And for the case we have any number of bidders, but only 2 signals per bidder, high or low, let's say, then we also can get a C approximation. And these are tight. And you should compare it with the boundary gap we had for the first case and the N approximation we had for the second case. So I remind you that these were the factors that the randomized lower bound was only with the 2 signals per agent. Okay. We have some more general results, a little bit less impressive. So for deterministic, it's still an improvement of what we had without. For deterministic, we have an N-1 C approximation. And for the randomized mechanism, we have something that looks like square root random approximation, which improves the N for only 2 signals. And a very good open question in my view is, can we get some O of C? So we have an example where we cannot get C in general, but it's still open if we can get some constant times C as an approximation ratio. Okay, how much time do I have? 8 minutes, okay. So let's go to the second condition we introduced, which is similarity over signals. Okay, so first we need to define what's a combinatorial auction in our model. So what's a combinatorial auction in general? So each bidder has a value for each set of items, and it might be different. So we have a combinatorial evaluation function, which might give each bidder a different value for each set of items. And for the interdependent values model for each agent I, its private signal can be either, we can think about single dimension, but we also consider multi-dimensional signals. So it can have a signal for each set of items. And his valuation function, he has a different valuation function for each set of items. And his valuation for this set of items depends on all the signals here, of all the bidders, not only on his own. So this is a natural extension. And a more concrete way to think, a more concrete example is unit demand valuations, where we have this Vij for every item j, and the value for set t is just the maximum over the valuations of the items. Okay. So what are the changes for combinatorial auctions? First of all, there's no simple characterization. The monotonicity characterization was a single parameter characterization. Now we have a multi-dimensional problem. So we cannot hope for such a simple characterization. There's some cycle monotonicity characterizations for those who know. So if we don't have the monotonicity characterization, then single crossing wouldn't help us. It goes hand in hand together. And even worse, there's a very strong impossibility by JL and Moldovano, which says that only in the very degenerate cases we can have optimal mechanisms. So in general, you cannot expect to have an optimal mechanism for this case. Okay, so how do we overcome this problem? So again, in this lower bound, we had the value was 1 if and only if all signals were high together, which means that signals were very complementary to each other. So I think a very natural thing to think about is maybe the signals are not complementary, but they act more like substitutes. And we formalize it by saying that the signals have decreasing marginal returns. Okay, so let me define what's submolarity over signals. So roughly it means that if all signals but some signal j are lower, then sensitivity to the signal j is higher. And so you can think about, okay, we have all these bidders. And okay, so one case is that all of them already have high signals, but one, all think it's a Picasso, but this bidder. So if he increases his signal from kindergarten kid to Picasso, it's not much an effect, because everybody already knows it's a Picasso. The other case is everybody thinks it's just a child's drawing, and then somebody reveals that he thinks it's a Picasso. So the effect is much larger. So as the signals of other builders are lower, the effect of increasing signal is much higher. This is conceptually what we try to capture. And formally, for any VI, for any I, we fix the signals of all other builders, but some builder J. And if they are lower, the effect in changing signal of J is higher. Okay. And we can extend it for committal auctions in a way that every VIT for every set T is some modular. Okay. And another thing we do is we can relax this to hold by some factor D, like we did with sin crossing. So we can relax it, and most results hold extend smoothly. So what are results? I'm going to talk about first welfare approximation for single item, for bidders, single parameter bidders with downward constraints, and for general combinatorial auctions. So in general, for single item, we can do only with single crossing. For downward cross constraint, even for downward cross constraint already, we can't achieve the optimal mechanism with single crossing. And for combinatorial auctions, there are the strongest possibilities I talked about. We generally cannot get any. We generally cannot implement the optimal mechanism. What we get is, with some morality, we get 4 approximations for all of these. For combinatorial auctions, we need some additional assumptions, separability assumptions. And for revenue maximization, for single item, so usually, in order to get any, most all works before us, use some single crossing type assumption. And we only, with some morality, we already get a constant approximation to revenue. And if we have this relaxed notion of some morality, everything, so we have some iteration. Usually it's linear with D, and here it's, we get some D-squared approximation. Okay, so these are results. And I don't have much time. Okay, so let me skip the mechanism for single item. It's just some random sampling mechanism. I won't go over the details. But, okay, what I want to say maybe is that, okay. So the mechanism extends to combinatorial auctions, but we need some separability assumption, which means that we can separate the effect of one signals to its value, then the effect of the other bit signals to its value. And then we can combine this random sampling with VCG type mechanisms and get still good approximation. And I also say, point out that truthfulness is not immediate, because it's not a single parameter domain. So we come out with VCG-inspired payments that make everything work nicely. Okay. The last thing I want to mention is that we have some other direction to tackle this difficulty. So instead of finding a truthful mechanism, we look at simple auctions in some way and see what happens to, what's the price of anarchy of these auctions, how bad this approximation can be. Okay, this is a joint work with Ori was here, and Bal, which I'm not sure she's here, so we can also ask them about it. And let me summarize. So I talked about that without any selling, this interdependent values model is very hard. And with sim crossing, we can get some nice results, but only for a limited domain. And so we introduced the notion of sim crossing, and so that it enables some approximation result for single item. And also we introduced the notion of some modularity over signals, and so that we can get a nice approximation result without any single crossing type assumption. Okay. Nice open questions. I talked about already, can you get an order of C in general for the cis crossing condition? And for some modularity, we showed that we can get a nice welfare approximation even for combinatorial auctions. So one thing you can do is try to remove the separability assumption. Another nice thing is to ask now questions about revenue or complexity that we already answered for the private value model. So these are all, I think, interesting directions. Okay. So thank you.
Yeah, I guess I have a question. The submodularity assumption still doesn't rule out the possibility that my value doesn't depend at all on my own signal, right? You could have something that's submodular, it just doesn't depend on my signal, it only depends on others.
Yes.
And then how do you provide any incentives for truthful reporting?
So in this case, I don't like. Yeah, sorry. So the question was, let me repeat it. Let's see if I got it. So submodularity doesn't rule out the fact that my value might not depend at all on my signal. That's true. But in this case, the mechanism should not care about my signal as well, and because it knows that my value, so the mechanism doesn't, like for our mechanism, for any what Paul described, then the valuation when you think when the mechanism has the valuation function computes the valuation on the bits, so my signal shouldn't affect my value, so I should as well build my own signal. It doesn't hurt me to report my own signal if it doesn't affect the way the mechanism would act. So the mechanism shouldn't take my signal to account, in a sense, when it computes the outcome for this case.
So I think what's true is that it can't be that my allocation then depends on my report, because my incentives would be screwed up.
Yeah.
But then if nobody's allocation depends on their own report, I would have thought you'd have difficulty getting, okay,
Okay.
Yes.
Some intuition why, why submodularity? Maybe you can have many different conditions why this kind of gives you this approximation.
Because you can think about, okay, so when you have submodularity, in one sense you can disentangle the effect my signal have on my value and the effect of other signals on my value. And the effect of other signals on my value, just a random subset of other signals can recover almost this effect. So this you can get by ruling out half of the players and only using the signals as input for the other half. And you can recover and you can incentivize the own bidder to report this signal because it really affects his allocation. So it can be monotone, let's say, for one item. More complicated for Committal.
Okay, thank you, Alon, again.